The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder, silencing the mockingbirds that had been singing in the cottonwood trees just moments before. Eliza Morgan dropped the basket of eggs she'd been carrying home from the henhouse, her heart seizing in her chest as she recognized the direction from which the sound had come, the direction of her home. Abandoning the broken shells that now stained the dry earth, Eliza gathered her skirts and ran, her bonnet flying off her head, golden brown hair coming loose from its pins. The summer heat of 1876 beat down on Calico, California, making the air shimmer above the parched ground, but Eliza felt only cold dread as she approached the small cabin she shared with her husband. "Frank," she called out, her voice breaking as she stumbled through the door. "Frank, what have you?" The words died in her throat. Her husband stood in the middle of their small parlor, revolver still smoking in his hand. At his feet lay the crumpled form of a man Eliza recognized as Thomas Jenkins, one of the miners who had recently disputed Frank's claim to a plot of land just north of town. "You're early," Frank Morgan said, his voice eerily calm as he looked up at his wife of 2 years. His eyes, always cold, now held something that made Eliza step back toward the door. "I didn't expect you back for another hour. What have you done?" Eliza whispered, unable to tear her eyes from the growing pool of crimson seeping into the floorboards beneath Jenkins' body. Frank's laugh was hollow. "What needed doing? Jenkins thought he could take what's mine." He gestured with the gun. "Nobody takes what belongs to Frank Morgan." "You've killed him," Eliza stated the obvious, her mind refusing to comprehend the horror before her. "In our home. And now you're going to help me get rid of him," Frank said, tucking the revolver into his belt. "Get the shovel from the shed." But Eliza couldn't move. This wasn't the first time Frank had shown his true nature. The bruises on her arms had only just faded from his last bout of rage. The coldness, the cruelty, she'd become familiar with it all since their wedding day, when the charming man she thought she'd married had transformed into someone unrecognizable. But murder, this was something else entirely. "I said get the shovel," Frank repeated, his voice hardening as he took a step toward her. "No," the word left her lips before she could consider the consequences. "I won't be part of this, Frank. This has to stop." His eyes narrowed. "You forget yourself, wife. What's mine is mine, and that includes you." The sound of approaching horses outside saved Eliza from whatever was coming next. Frank's head snapped toward the window. "That'll be Sheriff Davis," he muttered. "He must have heard the shot." He grabbed Eliza's arm, fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Listen to me. Jenkins attacked me. He broke in, threatened you. I had no choice but to defend my home. Do you understand?" Eliza stared back at him, seeing clearly for the first time the monster she had married. "You understand?" He hissed, giving her a shake. "I understand," she whispered, though what she understood was far different from what Frank meant. Sheriff Davis was already dismounting when Frank dragged Eliza outside to meet him. 2 deputies flanked the lawman, hands hovering near their weapons. "Morgan," the sheriff acknowledged, his weathered face betraying nothing as his eyes moved from Frank to Eliza. "Got reports of gunfire. Everything all right here?" Frank's arm slid around Eliza's shoulders in a gesture that might have seemed protective to anyone who didn't know better. "Jenkins broke into our home," Frank explained, his voice steady. "Threatened my wife. I had no choice but to defend what's mine." "That's so." Sheriff Davis looked to Eliza, whose face had gone pale. "Mrs. Morgan, is that what happened?" Eliza felt the slight pressure of Frank's fingers digging into her shoulder. A warning. She'd become fluent in his warnings over the years. "Jenkins is dead," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The sheriff's expression darkened. "That wasn't my question, madam." Eliza looked up at the lawman, then at the 2 deputies. Beyond them, she could see curious townsfolk beginning to gather at a distance. This moment, she realized with sudden clarity, would define the rest of her life. "No," she said, stepping away from her husband's grasp. "That's not what happened at all." Frank's face contorted with fury. "Eliza, he killed Jenkins in cold blood," Eliza continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Over a land dispute. Jenkins wasn't armed, he wasn't threatening anyone." The silence that followed her declaration was absolute. Even the desert breeze seemed to hold its breath. Sheriff Davis's hand moved to his gun. "Frank Morgan, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Thomas Jenkins." What happened next unfolded so quickly Eliza would later struggle to piece it together in her mind. Frank's hand went for his still warm revolver. There was shouting, more gunshots. When the dust settled, Frank Morgan lay dead in the dirt outside their cabin, and Eliza stood alone, her ears ringing from the gunfire, her life forever changed. In the days that followed, Eliza learned what it meant to be truly alone. The people of Calico, once friendly, if distant, now crossed the street to avoid her. Whispers followed her through town when she ventured out for supplies. Frank Morgan had been well liked, or at least well feared by many. His charm had won him friends in high places, and his ruthlessness had won him respect from those who valued such things. The truth about Jenkins' murder emerged slowly. He hadn't been the first man Frank had killed, merely the first he'd been caught for. The sheriff uncovered evidence linking Frank to 3 other disappearances over the past year, all men who had crossed him in business or disputed his increasingly aggressive land claims. But rather than absolving Eliza, these revelations seemed only to damn her further in the eyes of Calico. If Frank had been a monster all along, surely his wife had known. Surely she had been complicit in his crimes. A week after the shooting, Eliza stood in Calico's general store, waiting as the proprietor, Harold Simmons, filled her modest order of flour, coffee, and beans. The silence in the normally bustling store was oppressive. "That'll be $2.43, Simmons said stiffly, not meeting her eyes as he pushed the parcel across the counter. Eliza counted out the coins carefully. Her funds were dwindling, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could stay in the cabin. Frank's debts, it turned out, far outweighed any assets he'd claimed to have. "Thank you, Mr. Simmons," she said quietly, gathering her purchases. "Mrs. Morgan," a woman's voice stopped her before she reached the door. Eliza turned to see Martha Wilson, wife of the town's banker. "Or should we call you something else now? Accomplice, perhaps?" Eliza's grip tightened on her parcel. "I had nothing to do with my husband's actions, Mrs. Wilson." "Nothing?" Martha's eyebrows rose. "You lived with him, slept beside him, and we're to believe you never noticed his proclivities." "I never knew about the murders," Eliza said, though she knew as she spoke that it was a half-truth at best. She'd known Frank was capable of violence, had experienced it firsthand, but had never imagined the extent of his cruelty. "But you knew he was a brute," Martha pressed, stepping closer. "Everyone could see the bruises you tried to hide, the way you flinched when he raised his voice. Yet you stayed. You protected him." "I had nowhere else to go," Eliza whispered. Martha's laugh was bitter. "None of us do, my dear. That's no excuse for harboring a killer." Eliza looked around at the faces watching her, some hostile, others merely curious but none friendly. "I didn't harbor him. I stopped him in the end. I'm the one who told the sheriff the truth." "After the deed was done," Martha countered. "After poor Jenkins was already dead. How convenient." Unable to bear any more, Eliza pushed past the older woman and out into the scorching midday sun. She walked quickly, head down, desperate to escape the stares and whispers that followed her through town. She was nearly at the edge of Calico when a rock sailed past her head, missing by inches. Murderer's wife. A young voice called out. Eliza didn't turn to see who had thrown it. She clutched her parcel tighter and quickened her pace until the town was behind her, and only the lonely road to her cabin stretched ahead. That night, as she sat alone by the fireplace, Eliza considered her options. She could stay and endure the town's contempt, hoping it would eventually fade. She could sell what little she had and try to make her way to San Francisco or Los Angeles, where nobody knew her name. Or she could end it all in the cold waters of the creek that ran behind the property, a thought that came to her with frightening clarity in the darkest hours of the night. A knock at her door just after dawn the next morning startled Eliza from a fitful sleep. She sat up on the narrow bed, her heart pounding. Nobody had come to call since Frank's death, nobody except Sheriff Davis, who had taken her statement and not returned. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Eliza reached for the small derringer she'd taken to keeping beside her bed, another of Frank's possessions she'd discovered after his death. She approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Benjamin Riley," a male voice answered. "I've come about the land." Eliza frowned. The name wasn't familiar to her. "What land?" "The parcel north of town. Your husband's claim. May I come in, Mrs. Morgan? I'd rather not discuss business through a closed door." Eliza hesitated. The man's voice was deep, but not threatening. Still, she kept the derringer hidden in the folds of her nightdress as she unlatched the door and opened it just enough to see the visitor. Benjamin Riley was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean frame that spoke of a life spent working outdoors. His hair was the color of chestnuts, and despite the early hour, it looked as though he'd made an effort to tame it before calling on her. His eyes, a striking blue that reminded Eliza of the summer sky, regarded her with a directness that was neither unkind nor overly familiar. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, removing his hat. "I apologize for the early hour." "How do you know about Frank's land claim?" Eliza asked, not opening the door any wider. "I've been working a small silver claim about 10 miles east," he explained. "Word travels, I heard about your situation and thought perhaps you might be interested in selling the claim." Eliza's laugh was hollow. "Mr. Riley, I doubt my husband's claim would stand up to any legal scrutiny. He wasn't an honest man." Benjamin Riley's expression didn't change. "Nevertheless, it's filed with the territorial office. Whether he came by it honestly or not, it belongs to his estate now, which means it belongs to you." Eliza stared at him, trying to determine his angle. Everyone in Calico wanted something from her, mostly for her to disappear. "What did this stranger want? May I come in?" he asked again. "I have a proposition that might interest you." After a moment's hesitation, Eliza stepped back, opening the door wider. She was still in her nightdress with only a shawl hastily thrown over her shoulders, but propriety seemed a distant concern compared to her current troubles. "I haven't much to offer you," she said as he entered the small cabin. "No coffee or tea." "I'm not here for refreshments, Mrs. Morgan," he said, standing awkwardly in the center of the room. His eyes deliberately avoided the spot where Jenkins had fallen, though the bloodstain had been mostly scrubbed away. "I'm here to offer you a way out." Eliza's grip tightened on the derringer. "A way out of what exactly?" Benjamin gestured to the cabin around them. "This. Calico. I heard what they're saying in town. It isn't fair, and it isn't right." "You don't know anything about me," Eliza said quietly. "I know you're a woman alone in a town that's decided to blame you for your husband's sins," he replied. "That's enough for me to know you deserve better." Eliza studied him more carefully. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his days under the open sky. His clothes were dusty but of good quality, and his hands, though calloused, were clean. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Riley?" "I want to buy your husband's claim," he said simply. "For a fair price, enough for you to make a fresh start somewhere else." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Benjamin Riley's smile was slight but genuine. "Because that land adjoins my own claim. Because I believe there's good silver there. And because—" he hesitated. "Because no one should have to carry the weight of another person's crimes." Eliza felt something shift inside her at his words, the first kindness she'd heard since the day Frank died. "I need to get dressed," she said after a moment. "Wait outside and we can discuss this properly." Once he had stepped back out onto the porch, Eliza moved quickly to change into a simple blue dress, one of the few she owned that Frank hadn't purchased for her. As she pinned up her hair, she considered Benjamin Riley's offer. If the claim was legitimate, it might indeed be worth something. Enough to start over somewhere new. The idea of leaving Calico behind, of escaping the whispers and hostile stares, was tempting beyond measure. But there was something else, something in the way the stranger had looked at her. Not with pity or disgust, but with a simple human recognition that had been sorely lacking in her life of late. When she emerged onto the porch, Benjamin Riley was leaning against the railing, gazing out at the mountains that bordered the western edge of the valley. "Beautiful country," he remarked as she joined him. "Harsh but beautiful." "Yes," Eliza agreed, following his gaze. She'd thought the same when Frank had first brought her to California from her home in Missouri, before she'd come to associate the landscape with her isolation. "About your offer," she began. "I'm not certain the claim is worth anything." Frank wasn't forthcoming about his business dealings. Benjamin nodded. "I understand. That's why I've had it surveyed already. There's a promising vein of silver running through the northern section. Nothing that will make either of us rich overnight, but solid enough to be worth developing." Eliza turned to look at him, surprised. "You've had it surveyed? When?" "Last week, after I heard about what happened." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I hope you don't mind. The land isn't fenced and claim markers can be disputed, as Jenkins discovered," Eliza said quietly. Benjamin's expression sobered. "Yes. I'm sorry about that. I knew Thomas. Not well, but he seemed a decent sort." "He was," Eliza confirmed. "He didn't deserve what happened to him." "Neither do you," Benjamin said, his blue eyes meeting hers. "What the town is doing to you, it isn't right." Eliza looked away, uncomfortable with his directness. "How much?" she asked, changing the subject. "For the claim?" $500, he replied without hesitation. "Half now, half when the paperwork is filed and approved." Eliza's eyes widened. It was more money than she'd seen in one place since leaving her parents' home to marry Frank. Enough to get her to San Francisco and set herself up in modest accommodations while she found work. "That's generous," she said cautiously. Benjamin shrugged. "It's fair. Maybe even a bit less than fair, if the silver pans out the way I think it will." Eliza considered his offer. There had to be a catch. In her experience, men didn't make generous offers to women in desperate situations without expecting something in return. "Why are you really doing this, Mr. Riley?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "The truth, please." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the distant mountains. "I had a sister," he finally said, "younger than me by 6 years. She married a man like your Frank when she was just 18, charming, handsome, respected in the community." His jaw tightened. "And cruel behind closed doors." Eliza felt a chill despite the morning sun warming the porch. "What happened to her?" "She endured it for 3 years. By the end, she barely resembled the girl I'd grown up with." His hands gripped the porch railing. When he finally went too far and killed her, the town turned a blind eye, said she must have provoked him, said a man has a right to discipline his wife. "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered, understanding now the compassion she'd seen in his eyes. "So when I heard about you, about how the town was treating you, I couldn't just ride away," he continued. "Not again." The silence that fell between them was heavy with shared understanding. Eliza looked at this stranger with new eyes. Perhaps he wasn't so strange after all. "I'll accept your offer," she said finally. $500 for the claim. Benjamin's relief was visible. "You won't regret it, Mrs. Morgan. I'll have the papers drawn up today." "Eliza," she corrected him. "Just Eliza, please. I'd rather not use that name anymore," he nodded. "Eliza, then." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was warm and firm. "I'll return this afternoon with the papers and the first payment." True to his word, Benjamin Riley returned that afternoon with $250 in cash and documents for Eliza to sign. Sheriff Davis accompanied him to witness the transaction, though the lawman's demeanor remained cool toward Eliza. "You're doing the right thing, leaving Calico," the sheriff said as he signed his name as witness. "Fresh start will do you good." Eliza said nothing, merely accepting the envelope of cash Benjamin handed her. The weight of it felt strange in her hands, the weight of possibility, of freedom. "I'll help you make arrangements to leave if you'd like," Benjamin offered as the sheriff mounted his horse to return to town. "The stage comes through on Thursdays, heading west to San Francisco." Eliza hesitated. "That's very kind, but I can manage." Benjamin's expression was understanding but firm. "Forgive me for being blunt, but the town isn't safe for you anymore. Let me help, please." Before Eliza could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A group of 5 riders was coming up the road from town, dust billowing behind them. "Trouble," Sheriff Davis muttered, turning his horse back toward the cabin. "Riley, get Mrs. Morgan inside." Benjamin's hand went to the revolver at his hip. "What is it?" "Wilson and his friends," the sheriff replied grimly. "Been drinking since noon, talking big about justice for Jenkins." Eliza felt her blood run cold. George Wilson was the banker whose wife had confronted her in the store. He had been one of Frank's closest associates, and one of the few people who might know just how deeply involved Frank had been in the region's less legitimate business dealings. "Inside now," Benjamin said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He guided Eliza back onto the porch as the riders approached. Sheriff Davis positioned himself between the cabin and the approaching men. "That's far enough, Wilson," he called out. "Whatever business you think you have here can wait for a sober day." George Wilson, a portly man with a florid face made redder by drink, pulled his horse to a stop. The 4 men with him, all locals Eliza recognized as regular patrons of the saloon, spread out in a loose semicircle. "Heard Morgan's widow was selling up," Wilson slurred. "Thought maybe she'd like to know a few things about her husband's business before she goes." "Any business you had with Frank Morgan died with him," Sheriff Davis replied. "Mrs. Morgan is under the protection of the law." Wilson's laugh was ugly. "The law? That's rich coming from you, Davis. You took Morgan's money same as the rest of us." Eliza felt Benjamin stiffen beside her. "Go home, Wilson," the sheriff warned. "Sleep it off." "Not until I've had words with the widow," Wilson insisted, dismounting unsteadily. "She owes us." "She owes you nothing." Benjamin stepped forward, his voice steady. Wilson squinted up at the porch. "Who the hell are you?" "Benjamin Riley. I've purchased Mrs. Morgan's claim." "Claim?" Wilson spat on the ground. "That land was never Morgan's to sell. He stole it, same as he stole from all of us, and she knew." He pointed a finger at Eliza. "She knew what he was doing and she kept quiet. She's as guilty as he was." His evil sin isn't yours to carry, Eliza, Benjamin said quietly, turning to her. Don't listen to them. But Wilson had heard. Evil sin, he repeated, his voice rising. Is that what you call it when a man kills 4 people and extorts half the businesses in the county? When he threatens to burn down homes with families sleeping inside if they don't pay his protection fees? He took an unsteady step forward. And she lived off that blood money, wore fine dresses bought with our fear. Eliza felt sick. She had suspected Frank's income came from more than just his mining ventures, but she had never imagined the extent of his criminality. Or had she simply chosen not to see it? That's enough, Wilson. Sheriff Davis dismounted, placing himself between Wilson and the cabin. You're drunk and talking nonsense. Am I? Wilson challenged. Ask her about the ledger. Ask her where Morgan kept his records of who paid and who didn't. All eyes turned to Eliza, who stood frozen on the porch. I don't know anything about a ledger, she said, her voice barely audible. Liar. Wilson lunged forward, only to be restrained by the sheriff. Frank kept records of everything. Every payment, every threat, every man who worked for him. And the names of every official he had in his pocket. His gaze shifted meaningfully to the sheriff, including some in this very company. Sheriff Davis's face darkened. That's a dangerous accusation, Wilson. It's the truth, Wilson insisted, and his wife knows where those records are. She has to. Benjamin moved to stand beside Eliza, his presence solid and reassuring. Mrs. Morgan has agreed to sell the claim and leave Calico, he addressed the group. Whatever grievances you have with her husband should die with him. Not until we get what's ours, one of Wilson's companions called out. Morgan took plenty from all of us. His widow can make it right. Eliza felt trapped between the men's accusations and her own growing horror at what Frank had done. She had known he was capable of cruelty, had experienced it firsthand, but the scope of his crimes was only now becoming clear. I truly don't know about any ledger, she said, forcing strength into her voice. But I'll search the cabin. If such a thing exists, I'll turn it over to the proper authorities. The proper authorities, Wilson scoffed. Like Sheriff Davis here, who looked the other way while Morgan terrorized the county. No, madam, you'll turn it over to us. That's not happening, Benjamin said firmly. Now, I suggest you gentlemen return to town before this situation deteriorates further. The standoff continued for several tense moments, with Wilson and his companions glaring up at the porch while Sheriff Davis and Benjamin Riley stood their ground. Finally, Wilson spat again and turned back to his horse. This isn't over, he warned as he mounted unsteadily. We'll be back, and next time we won't be asking so nicely. The group rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving an uneasy silence in their wake. Is it true? Eliza asked the sheriff once the riders were out of earshot. Did Frank really have officials in his pocket? Sheriff Davis avoided her gaze. Your husband was a complicated man, Mrs. Morgan. Let's leave it at that. That's not an answer, Benjamin observed. The sheriff's expression hardened. I'm not here to satisfy your curiosity, Riley. My concern is keeping the peace in Calico. He turned to Eliza. Wilson's a drunk, but he's not entirely wrong. It would be best for everyone if you left sooner rather than later. With that, he mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Eliza and Benjamin alone at the cabin. You think there really is a ledger? Benjamin asked once the sheriff was gone. Eliza sighed, suddenly exhausted. I don't know. Frank kept his business dealings private. There's a lock box beneath the floorboards in the bedroom. I never asked what was in it. Maybe we should find out, Benjamin suggested. If there's evidence of Frank's crimes, it could help clear your name. Or implicate me further, Eliza said bitterly. As Wilson said, I lived off whatever Frank earned. Wore dresses he bought me. She looked down at her simple blue dress, one of the few garments she'd purchased with money earned from selling eggs and preserves to neighbors. "They'll never believe I didn't know." Benjamin's expression was gentle but firm. "What matters is the truth, Eliza. Did you know?" She met his gaze directly. "I knew he was capable of violence. I knew he threatened people who crossed him, but murder, extortion on the scale Wilson described." She shook her head. "No, I didn't know that. Or perhaps I didn't want to know." "Then let's find that ledger if it exists," Benjamin said. "Knowledge is power, even painful knowledge." Together they went inside the cabin. Eliza led him to the bedroom, a small space dominated by a brass bed Frank had insisted on ordering from San Francisco when they first married. She knelt beside it, working her fingers along the edge of one of the floorboards until she found the loose nail that allowed it to be lifted. Beneath the floor was a metal strongbox locked with a heavy padlock. "You have the key?" Benjamin asked, kneeling beside her. Eliza shook her head. "Frank kept it on his person, always." Benjamin considered the box. "I could break it open, but it might damage whatever's inside." "There's a hammer in the shed," Eliza suggested, "and a chisel. Frank used them for his projects." While Benjamin fetched the tools, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the strongbox that might contain proof of her husband's true nature and possibly her own complicity, whether intentional or not. "Are you sure about this?" Benjamin asked when he returned. "Once we open it, we can't unknow what we find." Eliza nodded. "I need to know the truth, all of it." It took several minutes of work with the hammer and chisel before the lock finally gave way. Benjamin stepped back, allowing Eliza to lift the lid herself. Inside the box were several items. A stack of cash, far more substantial than Eliza had ever seen in their home. A small leather-bound book that appeared to be the ledger Wilson had mentioned. A deed to a property in Sacramento that Eliza had never heard of. And most disturbingly, a small collection of personal items that could only have been taken from Frank's victims: a pocket watch, a wedding ring, a silver locket. "My God," Eliza whispered, lifting the locket. She opened it to find a photograph of a young woman and a small child. "He kept trophies." Benjamin's expression was grim as he examined the ledger. "This is worse than Wilson implied," he said after flipping through several pages. "Your husband wasn't just extorting businesses. He was running a full criminal operation: theft, protection rackets, smuggling, and yes, bribes to officials." He looked up at Eliza. "Including Sheriff Davis." Eliza felt sick. All this time, living under the same roof. "You couldn't have known," Benjamin said gently. "Men like Frank are expert at compartmentalizing their lives." "But I should have suspected," Eliza insisted. "The money, the gifts, I never asked where they came from." She gestured to the fine furnishings that had always seemed at odds with Frank's claims of modest mining success. "I chose not to see." "Out of self-preservation," Benjamin countered. "You said yourself he was violent. Questioning him might have put you in danger." Eliza wasn't sure if his words were meant to absolve her or simply explain her choices, but either way, they offered little comfort. She had lived with a monster, benefited from his crimes, and now held in her hands the evidence of just how terrible those crimes had been. "What do we do with this?" she asked, indicating the box's contents. Benjamin considered the question carefully. "If we turn it over to Davis, it will likely disappear. If we give it to Wilson and his friends, there could be violent reprisals against those named in the ledger." "We could take it to the federal marshal in San Bernardino," Eliza suggested. "Someone outside of Frank's influence." "That might be best," Benjamin agreed. "But first, I think you should read it, all of it. You deserve to know exactly what Frank was doing and who was involved." Eliza nodded, though the prospect of delving into the details of her husband's crimes filled her with dread. "Will you stay? I don't think I should be alone with this." Benjamin's smile was gentle. "I'll stay as long as you need." They spent the rest of the day and well into the night going through the ledger and the other contents of the strongbox. The picture that emerged was even darker than Eliza had feared. Frank had systematically terrorized much of San Bernardino County, using violence and intimidation to build a small empire of illegal businesses. The ledger named names not just of his victims, but of his accomplices, including several prominent citizens of Calico. "No wonder they all hate me," Eliza said as they finally closed the book around midnight. "I'm a reminder of their own corruption. Or their complicity through silence," Benjamin added. "Not everyone named here was directly involved, but many knew and said nothing." Eliza rubbed her tired eyes. "What happens when we take this to the marshal? Will there be trials? Will I have to testify?" "Possibly," Benjamin admitted. "But you'd be testifying against Frank's associates, not defending him. It might help clear your name, or it might not," Eliza said. "Either way, I can't stay in Calico." "Not now. The stage leaves day after tomorrow," Benjamin reminded her. "We could be on it, take this evidence directly to San Bernardino." Eliza noted his use of "we," but didn't comment on it. Over the course of the day, she'd come to appreciate Benjamin Riley's steady presence and clear thinking. The idea of facing what came next alone was becoming increasingly daunting. "I'll need tomorrow to pack," she said, "and decide what to do with the cabin." "I can help," Benjamin offered, "and keep watch. Wilson and his friends might return, especially if they've been drinking again." Eliza hesitated. Having a man stay in her home, even in the small parlor, would be scandalous under normal circumstances. But normal had fled her life the moment she'd found Frank standing over Jenkins' body. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'd appreciate that." Benjamin nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." Eliza retreated to the bedroom, but sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to the ledger, to the names listed there, to the evidence of crimes she'd unknowingly lived alongside. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were troubled by images of Frank standing over Jenkins' body, his cold eyes challenging her to do something about it. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the small kitchen. For a disorienting moment, she thought Frank had returned from the dead. Then reality reasserted itself, and she remembered Benjamin Riley had spent the night on the floor of her parlor. Dressing quickly, Eliza emerged to find Benjamin at the stove, frying bacon in her cast-iron skillet. "Hope you don't mind," he said, glancing up at her. "Thought you could use a proper breakfast before we start packing." "Not at all," Eliza replied, surprised by the domesticity of the scene. "Thank you." They ate in companionable silence, the events of the previous day sitting heavily between them. After clearing the dishes, Eliza began the task of deciding what to take and what to leave behind. In the end, her life in Calico fit into 2 trunks and a carpet bag. She kept only what she had brought into the marriage or purchased herself, leaving behind all of Frank's clothes and most of the furnishings that now felt tainted by the knowledge of how they had been acquired. Benjamin helped her load the trunks onto the small wagon he had brought, securing the strongbox beneath the seat where it wouldn't be easily visible. As they worked, Eliza found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way he moved with quiet efficiency, the gentle way he handled her belongings, the unexpected kindness in his blue eyes when they met hers. "What will you do after San Bernardino?" she asked as they secured the last of her possessions. "Return to your claim," Benjamin hesitated. "I'm not sure. Depends on how things go with the marshal, I suppose." He glanced at her. "What about you? San Francisco, Eliza nodded. That was the plan, find work, start over. The prospect seemed both liberating and terrifying. I've never lived in a city before. It's different, Benjamin acknowledged. Faster, louder, but there are opportunities there that you won't find in places like Calico. Have you been? A few times. Didn't care for it much myself, too many people, not enough sky. His smile was wry. But then, I've always been more comfortable with mountains than crowds. Before Eliza could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. This time, it wasn't just Wilson and his drinking companions. At least a dozen riders were approaching from the direction of town, and at their head was Sheriff Davis. Looks like Wilson wasn't content to wait, Benjamin said grimly, moving to stand between Eliza and the approaching crowd. Sheriff Davis pulled his horse to a stop a few yards from the cabin. His expression was unreadable as he surveyed the loaded wagon. "Leaving so soon, Mrs. Morgan?" he called out. "Without saying goodbye." "I was planning to depart on tomorrow's stage," Eliza replied, her heart racing. "As you suggested." "Plans change," the sheriff said. "George Wilson here has made some serious accusations. Says you're in possession of property that doesn't rightfully belong to you." Wilson, looking more sober than the previous day but no less hostile, urged his horse forward. "We know about the ledger, Mrs. Morgan, and the money. Your husband stole from half the people in this county, and we want what's ours." Eliza glanced at Benjamin, who gave her a subtle shake of his head. "Don't reveal what we know," his eyes seemed to say. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Mr. Wilson," Eliza said carefully. "I've packed only my personal belongings." "Search the wagon," Wilson demanded, turning to the sheriff. "And the cabin. She's hiding something." Sheriff Davis hesitated. Even from a distance, Eliza could see the conflict in his expression. If the ledger was found, his own corruption would be exposed. "I don't have a warrant to search private property," he said finally. "Since when has that stopped you?" Wilson challenged. "Or are you worried about what she might have found? What she knows about your arrangement with her husband?" A murmur went through the gathered crowd. Many of them weren't part of Wilson's original group. They were ordinary townsfolk, drawn by the commotion. Benjamin stepped forward. "Mrs. Morgan has sold her claim legally and is entitled to leave Calico with her possessions. If you have grievances against her late husband, take them up with the territorial court." "Easy for you to say," Wilson sneered. "You're not from around here. You didn't live under Morgan's thumb for years." He addressed the crowd. "Frank Morgan terrorized this town. He threatened our families, stole our hard-earned money, and killed anyone who stood against him. And all the while his wife lived in luxury, never questioning where the money came from." The accusations hung in the air, and Eliza could see them landing among the townsfolk. Some nodded in agreement while others looked uncertain. "That's not fair," a voice called from the back of the crowd. Eliza was surprised to recognize Martha Wilson, the banker's wife who had confronted her in the general store. "George, you know as well as I do that Frank Morgan was careful about keeping his business private, even from his wife." George Wilson turned to glare at his wife. "Stay out of this, Martha." "I will not," she replied, urging her horse forward to join her husband. "I didn't like Eliza Morgan, still don't if I'm being honest, but we have no right to blame her for Frank's sins." "She benefited from them," Wilson insisted. "As did you," Martha countered, her voice sharp. "Who financed the expansion of the bank last year when we couldn't secure a legitimate loan? Whose money built that new wing on our house?" She looked around at the assembled crowd. "How many of us took Frank Morgan's money when it suited us, asked no questions about where it came from, and now want to place all the blame on his widow?" A heavy silence fell over the group. Eliza stared at Martha Wilson, astonished by the woman's unexpected defense. "We're not here to debate the past," Sheriff Davis said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "We're here to ensure Mrs. Morgan doesn't leave town with property that doesn't belong to her." "Such as?" Benjamin challenged. "Money," Wilson said bluntly. "Morgan extorted thousands from businesses in this county. That money should be returned." "And the ledger," the sheriff added, unable to keep a hint of anxiety from his voice. "Any business records should be turned over to the proper authorities." "Meaning you," Eliza thought, studying the sheriff's face, "so you can destroy any evidence of your corruption." "I haven't found any business records," she said, the lie coming more easily than she expected. "And as for money, I've taken only what was in our household funds. The rest—" She gestured to the cabin behind her. "Whatever Frank had, it wasn't here." It wasn't entirely untrue. The money in the strongbox was substantial, but nowhere near the thousands Wilson claimed Frank had extorted. "She's lying," Wilson insisted. "Search the wagon." Before the sheriff could respond, Benjamin stepped forward again. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "I've been patient, but this has gone too far." He looked directly at Sheriff Davis. "Mrs. Morgan has cooperated fully with your investigation into her husband's death. She surrendered his claim, agreed to leave town, and asked for nothing but the chance to start over. Yet you stand by while these men harass and threaten her." "Now see here, Riley," the sheriff began. "No, you see," Benjamin cut him off. "I'm escorting Mrs. Morgan to San Bernardino tomorrow. If anyone attempts to stop us or harm her in any way, they'll answer to me." His hand rested meaningfully on his revolver. "And then they'll answer to the federal marshal, who I'm sure will be very interested to hear about the situation in Calico." The mention of the federal marshal sent another ripple through the crowd. Eliza could see the sheriff calculating his options, aware that his own complicity in Frank's crimes might be exposed if the situation escalated further. "No one's threatening Mrs. Morgan," he said finally. "We're simply ensuring justice is done." "Justice?" Benjamin's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you call this? A dozen armed men confronting a widow at her home?" Martha Wilson spoke up again. "He's right, Thomas," she said to the sheriff. "This isn't justice, it's a mob." She turned to her husband. "And you should know better, George. What would you have done in her position? Confronted a man like Frank Morgan, risked your life to expose him, when none of the rest of us had the courage to do so." Wilson had no immediate response, and in his silence, the mood of the crowd began to shift. The moral certainty that had fueled their anger was giving way to uncomfortable self-reflection. "Mrs. Morgan will leave on tomorrow's stage as planned," Sheriff Davis announced, clearly eager to defuse the situation. "If anyone has legitimate grievances against the late Frank Morgan, they can file them with my office or the territorial court." He looked pointedly at Wilson. "Through proper legal channels." With that pronouncement, he turned his horse and began to ride back toward town. After a moment's hesitation, most of the crowd followed. Wilson lingered, his expression dark. "This isn't over," he said, echoing his words from the previous day. "Morgan's crimes won't be forgotten or forgiven." "His evil sin isn't yours to carry, George," Martha said quietly, placing a hand on her husband's arm. "Let it go." Wilson shook her off, but after a final glare at Eliza and Benjamin, he too turned and rode away, his wife following after a sympathetic glance back at the pair standing by the wagon. As the dust settled in the wake of the departing crowd, Eliza realized she was trembling. The confrontation had drawn on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Are you all right?" Benjamin asked, his voice gentle. Eliza nodded, though she felt far from all right. "I didn't expect Martha Wilson to defend me. People can surprise you," Benjamin said. For better or worse. You think they'll be back? Eliza asked, looking toward the road to town. Not today, Benjamin replied, but I still think it's best we leave as planned. The stage stops in Calico at noon tomorrow. We should be on it. Eliza nodded, then hesitated. You're coming with me to San Bernardino. Benjamin met her gaze directly. If you'll allow it, I'd feel better seeing this through making sure the ledger reaches the federal marshal safely. He paused, and making sure you're safe as well. There was something in his expression that went beyond mere concern for her safety, a warmth that Eliza had almost forgotten could exist between two people. It both comforted and frightened her. I'd appreciate the company, she said finally. But what about your claim? Your silver mine? Benjamin shrugged. The silver's been there for millennia. It can wait a few more weeks. His smile was slight but genuine. Some things are more important than silver. They spent the rest of the day securing the cabin and finalizing preparations for the journey. Benjamin insisted on staying again that night, this time positioning himself on the porch where he could keep watch for any further trouble from town. Eliza slept better than she had since Frank's death, knowing Benjamin Riley was nearby. It was a comfort she hadn't anticipated, and one she wasn't entirely sure she should allow herself to feel, given how recently her life had been upended. Yet there it was, a small, warm spark of something that might, in time, grow into trust. Perhaps even more. The stagecoach arrived in Calico precisely at noon the following day. Eliza and Benjamin were waiting at the station, her trunks loaded, the strongbox securely hidden among her belongings. A small crowd had gathered to watch their departure, though Wilson and his most vocal supporters were notably absent. As the driver secured Eliza's trunks to the top of the coach, Martha Wilson approached, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Morgan," she said formally, "I wanted to apologize for my behavior at the general store and for my husband's actions." Eliza was surprised by the gesture. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. That's very kind." Martha glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I knew Frank was involved in things he shouldn't have been. We all did to some extent, but it was easier to look away." Her gaze met Eliza's directly, "and then to blame you when it all came to light." "I looked away too," Eliza admitted softly, "for different reasons perhaps, but with the same result." Martha nodded, understanding passing between the women. "Good luck in San Francisco," she said. "I hope you find the fresh start you deserve." As Martha stepped back, Sheriff Davis approached. His demeanor was professional but distant as he addressed Eliza. "Mrs. Morgan," he said with a nod, "I trust your journey will be uneventful." "Thank you, Sheriff," Eliza replied, careful to keep her expression neutral. The sheriff's gaze shifted to Benjamin. "Riley, a word." The two men stepped aside, speaking in low tones that Eliza couldn't quite make out. When Benjamin returned, his expression was grim. "What did he want?" she asked as they climbed into the stagecoach. Benjamin waited until they were seated and the door closed before answering. "He knows about the ledger, or strongly suspects, at least." He glanced out the window at the sheriff, who was watching the stage with narrowed eyes. "He suggested it would be safer for everyone if certain documents were to be lost during our journey." "A threat?" Eliza asked, her heart quickening. "A warning," Benjamin corrected, "but one we should heed. He has friends between here and San Bernardino." The stagecoach lurched into motion, beginning the journey that would take Eliza away from Calico forever. As the town receded behind them, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at escaping the hostile stares and whispers, regret for the blindness that had allowed her to live alongside Frank's evil, and a tentative hope for what might lie ahead. "I've been thinking," Benjamin said after they had traveled several miles in companionable silence, About what happens after San Bernardino. Eliza turned from the window to look at him. Oh, you mentioned San Francisco, he continued, his fingers drumming nervously on his knee. It's a fine city. Opportunities for a fresh start, as we discussed. Yes, Eliza agreed, puzzled by his apparent discomfort, but it's also expensive and crowded and far from, he hesitated, far from people who might care about your welfare. Eliza felt a flutter in her chest at his words. What are you suggesting, Mr. Riley? Benjamin met her gaze directly. I have a small ranch near Silver City, up in the Idaho Territory. Nothing fancy, a couple 100 acres, a modest house, good water. I've been working the silver claim here to raise capital to expand the ranch. He took a deep breath. You could come with me, I mean, there's a separate cabin on the property. You'd have your privacy, your independence, but you wouldn't be alone. Eliza stared at him, taken aback by the offer. That's very generous, but we barely know each other. I know, Benjamin said quickly. And I'm not proposing anything improper, just a safe place to land while you figure out your next steps. He smiled ruefully. I've seen how hard it can be for a woman alone in the territories, especially one with complicated circumstances. Eliza considered his words. The prospect of starting over completely alone in San Francisco had been daunting, though she'd been determined to face it. Benjamin's offer presented an alternative, a middle path between complete independence and the suffocating constraints of her marriage. Why would you do this? She asked finally. Take such an interest in my welfare. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. I told you about my sister, he said eventually. What I didn't tell you was that I wasn't there when she needed me. I was up in the Idaho Territory, working my ranch, while she was suffering under her husband's cruelty in Missouri. He looked up, his blue eyes filled with a pain that transcended the years. By the time I received her letters asking for help, it was too late. She was already gone. I'm so sorry, Eliza said softly, understanding now the depths of his commitment to helping her. When I heard about your situation in Calico, about how the town was treating you, it felt like a second chance in a way, Benjamin continued. A chance to do what I couldn't do for Rebecca. Eliza reached across the space between them and took his hand. It was an impulsive gesture and one that surprised them both. Thank you for telling me, she said. For being honest about your motivations. Benjamin's hand tightened around hers. So, will you consider it? Coming to Idaho instead of San Francisco. Eliza withdrew her hand, needing the space to think clearly. I can't answer that yet. Let's see what happens in San Bernardino first. Benjamin nodded, accepting her caution. Of course, no pressure. The offer stands, whatever you decide. The journey to San Bernardino took 3 days, during which Eliza and Benjamin had ample time to talk. She learned about his ranch in Idaho, about the small community of Silver City, where he'd settled after years of drifting through the territories. He learned about her childhood in Missouri, her brief teaching career before her marriage, and her hopes for a future where she might reclaim some of the independence she'd sacrificed when she became Mrs. Frank Morgan. They avoided discussing the ledger or Frank's crimes during the journey, aware of the other passengers who shared the coach at various points. But the shared secret created a bond between them, a partnership in pursuing justice that felt fundamentally different from anything Eliza had experienced in her marriage. By the time they reached San Bernardino, Eliza had made her decision. After they delivered the ledger to the federal marshal, a stern but fair-minded man named James Collins, she told Benjamin her answer. I'd like to accept your offer, she said as they walked away from the marshal's office, the weight of the strongbox no longer between them, at least temporarily. Until I find my feet again. Benjamin's relief was evident in his smile. "I'm glad," he said simply. "We can take the northbound train tomorrow, be in Silver City within a week." The journey north was long but not unpleasant. As they traveled further from California and the shadow of Frank Morgan, Eliza felt herself beginning to breathe more freely. The vast landscapes they passed through the mountains of Nevada, the high desert of eastern Oregon spoke of possibility, of open spaces where a person might redefine themselves. Benjamin was a considerate traveling companion, respectful of her need for quiet reflection at times, engaging in thoughtful conversation at others. By the time they reached Silver City in the Idaho Territory, Eliza felt she knew him better than she had ever known Frank, despite the brevity of their acquaintance. The Riley Ranch was exactly as Benjamin had described it, modest but well-tended, with a main house built of sturdy logs and a smaller cabin about 100 yards away beside a clear running creek. The land around it rolled gently toward distant mountains, dotted with stands of pine and aspen. "It's beautiful," Eliza said as Benjamin showed her to the cabin that would be her home. "Peaceful. It can be lonely," Benjamin cautioned. "The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away and town is a half-day's ride." "After Calico, lonely sounds appealing," Eliza replied with a small smile. The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a front porch that caught the afternoon sun. Benjamin had arranged for basic supplies to be delivered from town, ensuring Eliza would have everything she needed to settle in. "I'll leave you to get acquainted with the place," he said, stepping back toward the door. "But please join me for supper at the main house if you feel up to it. No obligation." Eliza appreciated his sensitivity to her need for space. "Thank you. I think I will, actually. It's been a long journey, and I'm not quite ready to be entirely on my own." Supper that evening was simple venison stew, fresh bread, and early summer strawberries Benjamin had purchased in town as a welcome gift. They ate at the scrubbed wooden table in his kitchen, the conversation easy and unforced. "I've been thinking about what I might do here," Eliza said as they finished the meal. "To contribute, I mean. I can't accept your hospitality indefinitely without giving something in return." Benjamin looked surprised. "There's no rush to figure that out. You've been through a lot. Take time to rest." "I've rested enough on the journey here," Eliza insisted. "I need purpose, Benjamin, work of my own." He considered this, then nodded. "The ranch could use a proper garden." "I've never had the time or skill for more than a few basic vegetables. And the house." He glanced around with a rueful smile. "Well, it could benefit from a woman's touch, I suppose. I'm a fair hand with a needle," Eliza offered. "And I was known for my preserves back in Missouri. Jams, pickles, that sort of thing." "That would be welcome," Benjamin said. "But I was also thinking about your teaching experience. Silver City has a small school, but they're always short of qualified teachers. If you were interested, I could introduce you to the school board." The idea of returning to teaching, of having a profession of her own, was appealing. "I'd like that," Eliza said, "though I'm not sure how the town would feel about hiring a woman with my history." "Your history is what you make of it," Benjamin replied. "And Silver City isn't Calico. People here mind their own business for the most part." The weeks that followed proved him right. Silver City was a mining town like Calico, but with a different temperament. The silver boom that had given the town its name had settled into a steady industry rather than a frenzied rush, and the community had developed accordingly. There were families, a small church, shops that sold more than just mining supplies. Eliza was introduced as a widow from California, a friend of Benjamin Riley's who was staying at his ranch while she settled in the territory. If there were whispers about the arrangement, they didn't reach her ears. And when she met with the school board about a potential teaching position for the fall term, they were more interested in her qualifications than her personal circumstances. Through the summer months, Eliza found herself settling into life at the Riley Ranch with surprising ease. The small cabin became a home, decorated with wildflowers she gathered on her walks and curtains she sewed from fabric purchased in town. The garden she planted flourished in the fertile soil beside the creek, providing vegetables for both her table and Benjamin's. They established a routine of shared meals, breakfast and supper at the main house, midday dinner taken separately as they attended to their respective tasks. Benjamin was busy with the ranch, especially as summer progressed, and it was time to put up hay for the winter. Eliza divided her time between the garden, preparing for her teaching position, and exploring the countryside around the ranch. As August arrived, bringing with it the first subtle hints of autumn in the higher elevations, Eliza realized that something significant had shifted within her. The grief and shame that had been her constant companions in Calico had receded, replaced by a quiet contentment. And at the center of that contentment, increasingly, was Benjamin Riley. It wasn't just gratitude she felt toward him, though that remained. It was something deeper, more complex. She found herself looking forward to their shared meals, to the conversations that often extended long into the evening. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his hands when he tended to an injured foal, the respect with which he treated every person they encountered in town. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the main house watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold, Eliza found the courage to broach a subject they had tacitly avoided. "Benjamin," she began, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her shawl. "I've been thinking about my situation here, my status." He turned to look at her, his expression curious but open. "What about it?" "Well, school begins next month. I'll be teaching the children of Silver City. And while the school board didn't seem concerned about my living arrangements, I wonder if others might be." "You're worried about gossip?" Benjamin asked. "Not for my sake," Eliza clarified, "but for yours. You've been so kind, so honorable in all this. I wouldn't want your reputation to suffer because of me." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the sunset. "I've never put much stock in what others think of me," he said finally. "But if you're uncomfortable with the arrangement, we could consider alternatives." "That's just it," Eliza said softly. "I'm not uncomfortable, not anymore, in fact." She took a deep breath. "I've come to value your company greatly, more than I expected to." Benjamin turned to her again, his blue eyes serious. "Eliza, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps we should consider a more permanent arrangement." The words came out in a rush, and Eliza immediately felt heat rising to her cheeks. "If you were interested, that is." A slow smile spread across Benjamin's face. "Are you proposing to me, Eliza Morgan?" Despite her nervousness, Eliza couldn't help but laugh. "I suppose I am, in a manner of speaking, though it's terribly forward of me." Benjamin reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. "I've been trying to find the courage to have this very conversation for weeks," he admitted. "But I was afraid it was too soon, that you needed more time to heal from everything that happened in Calico." "I thought the same," Eliza said. "But then I realized Frank never gave me the chance to heal from anything. He simply demanded, and I complied." She squeezed Benjamin's hand. "You've done the opposite. You've given me space, respect, the chance to rediscover who I am apart from being someone's wife. And in doing so, you've shown me what a true partnership might look like." Benjamin's expression grew serious. "I don't want you to feel obligated in any way, Eliza. What I offered, a place to stay, a fresh start that stands regardless of any deeper feelings that might exist between us. I know that, Eliza assured him. That's why I can speak freely now, because I know you don't expect anything from me that I'm not willing to give. Benjamin stood, drawing Eliza to her feet as well. In the fading light, his face was half in shadow, but his eyes were bright as they met hers. "Then may I be forward as well?" he asked, his voice low. "May I kiss you, Eliza, as I've wanted to do since that day on the stagecoach when you told me about teaching poetry to reluctant farm children in Missouri, and your eyes lit up with a passion I found utterly captivating." Eliza's breath caught at the unexpected declaration. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Benjamin's lips were gentle against hers, the kiss tentative at first, then deepening as Eliza responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Eliza felt a sense of rightness of coming home that she had never experienced with Frank. When they finally parted, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Eliza Morgan," he said simply. "Not because you needed saving, but because of who you are, your strength, your kindness, your determination to forge your own path despite everything life has thrown at you." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and entirely natural. "And I would be honored to be your wife if you'll have me." "If I'll have you," Benjamin repeated with a soft laugh, as if there were any question. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver City. The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of Benjamin's friends from town and the neighboring ranches. Eliza wore a new dress of blue silk purchased with her own money from her advance payment from the school board, and carried wildflowers gathered from the meadow near her cabin. As they exchanged vows, Eliza was struck by how different this felt from her wedding to Frank. That day had been all external show, with little consideration for the life that would follow. This was the opposite, a quiet ceremony that represented a partnership already taking root, a love growing from shared experience and mutual respect. Word of their marriage reached Calico eventually, carried by the same web of correspondence and gossip that connected all the frontier communities. Martha Wilson wrote to Eliza, congratulating her and sharing news that the federal marshal had indeed acted on the evidence in Frank's ledger. Several prominent citizens of Calico, including Sheriff Davis, had been removed from their positions and faced charges for their involvement in Frank's criminal activities. "The town is changed," Martha wrote. "Humbled, perhaps. There is talk of renaming some of the streets, as if that could erase the past. But I think the real change is in how we see ourselves, not as victims of Frank Morgan's schemes, but as people who allowed fear to silence us for too long. Your courage in speaking the truth has taught us all a valuable lesson." Eliza read the letter to Benjamin as they sat by the fire in what was now their shared home. The small cabin by the creek had become a guest house, occasionally used when friends visited from distant ranches, but otherwise standing as a reminder of Eliza's journey to independence. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked as she folded the letter. "Standing up to Frank that day? Telling the sheriff the truth? It set you on a hard road." Eliza considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "It was the first truly honest act of my marriage, perhaps of my adult life." She looked up at her husband, still marveling at the ease with which she could meet his gaze without fear. "And it led me here, to you, to this life we're building." Benjamin smiled, reaching across to take her hand. "Speaking of building," he said, his expression turning mischievous. "Mrs. Riley, I believe you promised to help me select colors for the nursery this weekend." Eliza's free hand moved instinctively to the slight swell of her belly, where their first child was growing. The baby wasn't due until spring, But Benjamin had insisted on starting preparations early, his excitement about becoming a father evident in everything from the cradle he was crafting to the lullabies he already practiced in the evening. "Blue," she said decisively. "A sky blue, like your eyes. It will be perfect regardless of whether we have a son or daughter." "A wise choice," Benjamin agreed, leaning over to kiss her. "As wise as the day you proposed to me on the porch." Eliza laughed, the sound free and unrestrained in a way it never had been in Calico. "That was rather scandalous of me, wasn't it?" "Delightfully so," Benjamin assured her. "Though not nearly as scandalous as what I'm considering doing now, Mrs. Riley." "And what might that be?" Eliza asked, her voice dropping to match his playful tone. "Taking my wife to bed well before the sun has set," he murmured, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below her ear. "Quite improper, don't you think?" "Terribly," Eliza agreed, already rising to her feet and drawing him with her toward their bedroom. "Whatever would the good people of Silver City say?" "They'd say Benjamin Riley is the luckiest man in the Idaho Territory," he replied, following her with a look of such love that Eliza felt it like a physical warmth spreading through her chest. And as the door closed behind them, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that she too was lucky, blessed with a love that asked nothing of her but to be herself, a partner who saw her strength rather than seeking to diminish it, and a future as vast and full of promise as the western sky. Frank Morgan's evil had cast a long shadow, one that had nearly consumed her. But Benjamin had been right that day in Calico. His evil sin wasn't hers to carry. She had set it down, step by step, and walked into the light of a new day. A day that had become a week, a month, a season, and now stretched before her as a lifetime of possibilities, with Benjamin Riley by her side.